Hey everybody, so today I am doing a little bit of an experiment. I've got some new equipment that I'm using today. I'm going to be using a webcam today instead of my camcorder as well. I've got another camera. I'm going to be doing a little bit of work online while we're doing the chat, and so hopefully that all works out well. Either way, I'll be sticking with the Heresy Hump Day agenda, and we'll just see how all the technical stuff works out. Hope everybody's had a good couple of weeks. Today I have a couple different topics. I am going to work on my beastmen a bit. I'm not going to do an actual table down today because I've showed them recently. I'm going to work on some easy stuff like just painting some of the horns and stuff while we're doing the chat. And I'll talk a little bit about them just in getting them started. As well, Star Wars is going to be kind of the theme today, and it's kind of interesting. I'm not a tremendously huge Star Wars fan, but I do like Star Wars, and I thought that I wanted to talk a little bit about the latest movie in relation to recent movies. So if you're not into that, you feel free to check it out, or you can skip till later. The topic after that is going to actually have a little bit of a Star Wars component too, but it's actually game components is what the topic's going to be. And so it's going to include a bit of Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars. And so, yeah, so that's going to be what I'm sort of talking about in the chat today while I paint. And for those of you that have not seen the new movie and still want to, I'll let you know before I get to that point. You know, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there will be spoilers in the video. I do have a sponsored beer today, and it is New Belgium Fat Tire. Look at the camera there. Yeah, it's a little shiny under the light. And then I've got my other camera here as well. That'll be doing the painting chat on. So we'll see how that goes today. And so I've had New Belgium in the past. It's not one I've always been able to get here in Canada. I drank it in the U.S. It was actually when I was going to Denver quite a bit, because I believe this is brewed originally. It's Fort Collins, Colorado. When I was going to Denver quite a bit, I would actually drink Fat Tire when I was there, and when I looked for it here, I couldn't actually get it. And now you can get it pretty easily in Canada. It's made by New Belgium. It's a Belgian-style ale. Funny thing is, it's also made in Asheville, where I was just at Asheville, North Carolina, which there's like a million breweries there now in Asheville. And so New Belgium's actually brewing beer in both Fort Collins, Colorado, and Asheville, North Carolina. Very good, tasty beer. So, whoa, and it wants to come out of the bottle. Nice amber color. I also picked myself up a little blue, I think they call it a snowball, microphone for the channel as well. And it's worked out pretty good so far. We'll see how it captures on this video. I think that my camcorder mic was a little better than my typical webcam mic that I have. And so I wanted to just kind of improve my sound quality at the same time as switching to the webcams. So, I saw The Last Jedi with the wife and kids over the weekend. Before I get into that and get into spoilers from that one, I would say that when The Force Awakens came out, I can't believe it's been 2 years, but 2 years ago, I really didn't know what to think about it initially. My wife and kids really loved it when we came out of the theater. I mean, they really enjoyed it. I had a lot of trouble with it. Like, I liked it, and I'll tell you the reasons why I like some of it, but there were parts of it that I had a lot of trouble with, too. I couldn't get over the fact that I felt like I'd seen this movie before. It really did, attempt to, I think, reboot the series with familiar themes from many of the themes in the original 3 in order to kind of kick that off in a way that it remains Star Wars and brings a whole new generation of fans in. But for the older fans that have all that fresh in their mind that grew up on the originals, it felt to some, I think, I don't think I'm alone in this, just that it was like very much repetitive. I mean, like, instead of having the Death Star, now we've got the bigger Death Star, and many things just seem oddly familiar. Like just basic things like the planet that Rey came from, and just some of the similarities between her and Luke Skywalker. There really were just a lot of commonalities with the original films. Now, when I was watching the movie, some of the things that made me like it at the time, I have a tendency I can watch a movie and really get in tune with a certain scene. And for me, it can make the experience of going to the movie. And so there was a point in The Force Awakens where the TIE fighters were coming in. And I think it was the scene where they were coming in after Rey and Finn and BB-8. And you just saw them on the horizon in the desert with the sun sort of reflecting on the TIE fighters. And just that alone, like that image right there of seeing the modern technology showing the TIE fighters and just showing the sun on the top of the ships, like going over a land, not in space, was just so impressive to me that, it's one of those things I never forgot. I just really, really quite liked it. And that alone, like little things like that, can make a movie for me. Like they can enhance the experience so much that I can end up thinking favorably about the movie in some respects, even if there were things that I didn't like. I thought the opening of the movie was really, really good. I mean, the scene where the stormtroopers were in the troop transports coming down to the planet, and they had the lights flickering and the stormtroopers inside. I just loved that scene. I really quite liked how they opened it up, the movie. And Kylo Ren, when in the beginning of the movie stops a laser blaster or a laser in midair and just keeps it sitting there. I'd never seen that in a Star Wars movie before, and it just really impressed me. It really made me sort of drawn to his character initially in that movie. I just thought it was amazing. I loved it. It's those things that, and in the way that we're so impressed with most of us, I think, Darth Vader and his ability to crush somebody's throat, with the Force. Those little cool things that they do, the bad guys using the Force, that kind of ranked up there with me. I just love that. there were aspects to the film, friends that I have that are into Star Wars will defend the film and when I bring this up, but I didn't really like how easily Kylo Ren was sort of matched by Finn and Rey in the first movie. When trying to show his character, developing him as a bad guy, like I felt that they showed a lot of weakness in the first film. And it wasn't very impressive to me. Initially in the first film, I thought that they took the mask off of him way too early. Because basically you have essentially a masked guy, because everybody wondered for so long like what Vader looked like underneath that when you think about him, even despite all of the films with Anakin Skywalker later, there's tremendous periods of time where he was just Vader and he just had the mask and that was it, and everything you associated with that mask. It was a very powerful visual, and I didn't quite get that because they took it off so soon and in the movie with in the Force Awakens. But it was still a good film. I sometimes do need to judge it based on the reactions of my kids and other target audiences and not just myself. It did sour me a bit on the new Star Wars, like kind of just I know there's a lot of iterations, the prequels and the originals and now this, but I wasn't honestly really looking forward to seeing The Last Jedi, if I had to be really honest with you about it. And I'm not quite there yet for Rogue One, because I do want to talk about Rogue One as well. But I haven't kept up with it, like on the internet, and so I didn't really know what to expect. And given sort of the taste in my mouth for the last one, there were aspects to it that I liked, as I mentioned, some of the visuals. And that part I knew that there were going to probably be pieces that I just loved. But then there was aspects to it that I just wondered whether I really wanted to see it, like in the theater, because of that. And that's why it took a long time to go. Now, I'm not sure I can add a tremendous amount more to my thoughts on, even though there is probably a lot more to say. As far as crucial things for me with the Force Awakens. Oh, well, I guess what I could say is I really enjoyed the addition of Finn to the movie series. I thought that was something that wasn't in the originals and wasn't just something that was kind of added and rehashed in my mind. I really enjoyed his whole addition to it. I thought he was excellent. I can go into this a little bit further in talking about The Last Jedi, but overall, I'm not really that crazy about Rey as a character and an actress in the films. Part of it is in all of my exposure to the character. You know what? I'm gonna talk about that later when talking about The Last Jedi, because I can mention things from that film. It's better for me to mention that later. So, initially, when they talked about Rogue One, I really wasn't sure what to think of it as the advertisements were coming out. And my first impression of the movie, when they showed the scene, they showed the actress that played the main character in Rogue One, they showed her say, it's a rebellion, I rebel, and I kind of thought that she was like no more than 16 years old. When I first saw the commercial, like I didn't really know how old she was, but I got this impression that she was like 16 and she was sitting there and telling them all on the ship that this is rebellion, so I'll rebel. And it was just sort of like very much like a teenagerish sort of response when I initially saw it, and I was kind of turned off a bit. I mean, I was kind of like rolling my eyes when I was watching it, and part of it may have been just coming off of some of the aspects of the Force Awakens and just things like that. But I honestly kind of got a bad first impression in my head. Maybe as I watched more of the trailer and kept watching it and seeing more about it, I changed my mind a bit, because I don't seem to remember going into the movie with a negative attitude about it, but my first impression wasn't that great. I really, really loved Rogue One as a movie. Like, when I saw it, when I walked out of the theater, I immediately said to my family, like, we all enjoyed it, but I had said, this is one I have to get the DVD on. I need to rewatch this. I really enjoyed this. I've heard people describe it as like almost more like a World War II film than like a Star Wars film, in the way that it was produced. The story and the plot were done. I love the fact that they took risks and went to like a smaller microcosm of the universe, telling a smaller part of the story away from the main trilogies. And it just opens up a total new area to like tell stories within the Star Wars universe. I just absolutely love that. Some of the characters, like there was the guy who's not a Jedi, but kind of believes in the Force, and I was reading a review of the Last Jedi and why it's better than Rogue One, in somebody's opinion. And one of the things they said is that there's so much more Force in the Last Jedi. Like, that's not really a spoiler, right? Because the main universe has characters that wield the Force, whether it be on the dark side or the light side. And they were just saying how everything's compressed down. It's, the power levels, as we talk like in gaming, like, from some games next to others, like in these movies, it's similar. And that Rogue One the power levels were a bit down in many respects. And in the characters, you didn't have like, your Sith Lords and things like in the... I mean, there was an appearance of Darth Vader real quick, but you didn't have like your for the most part, your main characters. And so I just kind of finished one guy here. I'm just taking a drink before I go to the next. And so I thought the way they depicted the Force and the use of the Force by that character who's not a Jedi but wholeheartedly believes in the Force and sort of the religion, so to speak, and the way they encapsulated that made it even more powerful, because as the viewer, we know that exists in that universe and that there are Jedis and the Force is real in that universe, and this character is kind of devout, despite the fact that he doesn't have the ability to manipulate it and wield it, as far as we know. And it just shows like a faith. And in some respects, it kind of comes to fulfillment. And I found that in the story to be much more powerful than just somebody, easily moving things around, perceived easily. And so I thought that was amazing. So when I read this review and the person was saying how like one of the reasons why The Last Jedi is so much better than Rogue One is because, the ever-present nature and the amount of the Force that we see. And I just thought, yeah, that's kind of a narrow way to look at it in my mind. And so I love some of the characters that they had in Rogue One, the support characters. My kids laughed quite a bit at the robot, the droid in Rogue One. He was really funny and a really cool addition to the film in my mind. I think the fact that, and this is a spoiler if you haven't watched Rogue One, you can stop it, but Rogue One's been out for a while now, so if you haven't watched it by now, there's a good chance that you're not chomping at the bit to watch it. The fact that most folks kind of die in the film, many people didn't like that, just because when you really like a character, you end up wanting to see more of them, and you just kind of ended it. I thought it just tied into that whole taking chances thing that they did with the whole film to begin with, and I really like their decision in just about every way. The ending was very, dramatic and fitting, and I thought it was very good. Now I hear they may be there's a possibility they still will do some prequels to that story with that character, or those characters, I should say. That would be very cool, in my opinion. So we'll see about that. It's been a little while since I've seen Rogue One, so I've not watched it recently to dissect it for the thoughts on this. But I kind of wanted to just share my thoughts on Rogue One as sort of the in-between movie and where they're going with some aspects of the universe. I've kind of compared it at times to Logan in Marvel. Now, I wasn't Logan didn't stand out as a pivotal film for me, within the Marvel universe. But even before watching it, when sort of seeing what they were trying to do with it, I recognized that they were trying to take some chances and do some different things. Tell stories that weren't as epic when it comes to superpowers in the Marvel universe, and just a bit more story-driven, a bit more grounded, and just ability to tell some different kinds of stories within the universe. And I really respected them for that, and for doing that. I thought the film was okay. It didn't necessarily capture me in the way Rogue One did, and I'm more of a Marvel fan. But I don't think that's the reason why. I think it was just the film itself just didn't do it for me as much. But I know of the comic Old Man Logan. I've not read it, that it's supposedly based on. But I saw that as a bit of a comparison. Now, The Last Jedi. So there'll be spoilers here now. So for those of you that haven't seen the film and still want to watch it, you may want to skip through this. I really, overall, I really enjoyed The Last Jedi as a film. Let me talk a little bit, I guess, about what I enjoyed about it first. I just watched it recently. It was just, I think I did mention it was just last weekend. And I really enjoyed what they did with Kylo Ren as where Ben. I wonder if I don't know if they call him Ben Solo or if he's referred to that way, but I think in the same way that Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, I'm guessing that Kylo Ren is like Ben Solo or something like that. But basically, they established him much better as a maskless sort of Sith. I don't know if he's a Sith Lord or a bad Jedi or what, but they went through that process to have him sort of ditch his mask. I really liked the haunting sort of aspect of the actor in the way he portrayed the character. I felt that he was very convincing, and he really showed himself better to be a disturbed individual, a really struggling individual. And other than when he's screaming and he's like within combat, the way he delivers his facial expressions throughout the movie, I thought was convincing and drew me into to accept the character and like the character as a bad guy. And so, even though he's not a Darth Vader, and they don't make him out to be yet, for the film. And that's actually kind of like part of it, you know, in that he's trying to be as good as Darth Vader. One of his fears is that he's not going to be. I still think that they've built him up well. I really liked the fight scene with him and Rey when they sort of work together to. I think it's not Smokes. I forget the name of the actual Sith Lord, Snoke or something like that. When they work together. I found that moment to be somewhat surprising when he turned the saber and killed his master and worked together, and it was a nice fight scene. I quite like that. I wouldn't rank it as good of a scene as the Phantom Menace in the beginning with Darth Maul by any means, but it was nice to get that feeling of a halfway decent fight scene in there with lightsabers and things. Despite not liking the prequels overall, I really enjoyed some of the lightsaber scenes in the Phantom Menace, and kind of going back to what I said on how certain things within a movie can really make it stand out for me and make me appreciate the movie and, you know, overall, like, even though I might not like other things. The Phantom Menace, the Darth Maul, and the fight scenes in there, and some of the rolling battle droids, some of the stuff they added there, I really enjoyed. And in some ways, they've almost become hallmarks in certain respects in those components for other films, you know, to compare to. I don't remember if it was I think it was the second movie where Boba Fett was in his Slave One and chasing Obi-Wan Kenobi and then releasing the depth charges, and there was like basically a scene where he was chasing him, and I loved that scene. I just loved the way they did the special effects for that, and that was another thing where I just really think back to the film and enjoyed that part. I think out of all the Star Wars movies put together, the second one, Episode 2, is probably my least favorite of all of them, but that one scene I really quite liked. And it just makes it great because you can at least enjoy that part of it. So that fight scene was great. I liked the dynamic between Rey and Ben, or Kylo Ren. I always get the name confused. I'm still struggling with that a bit because it sounds too similar to me. But I liked the way they captured that on film. I enjoyed that. It's going to be good for, I think, the development of the characters in future films. And the story, I should say. I enjoyed some of the... As always, I enjoyed some of the space battles. Like, I really liked the one in the beginning where they destroyed the Dreadnought, and I liked the addition of the Rebel bombers coming across, and I thought that was very cool. And one of the most epic scenes in the movie for me was when they turned the ship, one of the heavy carriers, and around, and it's a spoiler, but I'm not giving the details, but essentially, you know, going to light speed to destroy that huge ship, to go right through it. I thought that was very cool. Now, I honestly kind of predicted that. Like, when I was talking to the folks, like my family, like nobody else said or cared to admit to that they predicted that. But as soon as she mentioned that she was turning, I immediately just had this image of the first movie, or episode 4, I guess, when they're talking about light speed and what it entails and how calculations have to be done and how you don't want to have a collision. That sort of discussion was like in my head when I was watching this film, and they decided to turn that ship around. I knew that's what they were going to do, and then but it didn't actually. I'm not saying that in a negative way, like, oh, I knew it, it was predictable. No, I actually knew it, but it was like so epic. I loved it, and the way they showed it happen the special effects. It was just really, really cool. I really thought that was awesome. I thought the way they utilized Luke in the end was actually cool. I did not expect that, him sort of remotely, his presence being there remote. And I thought that was actually kind of cool. I will admit that during some of the training of Rey, I found it a little boring. It was a long movie, and I was kind of tired to begin with that weekend. I hadn't slept well the night before, so that did affect the movie for me a little bit. And I found during a couple of the slow parts, I found it kind of difficult. I'm sorry if I'm going off camera here with my painting a bit. This is a little new for me, and although I should just be able to do this easily, the talking and the painting and the doing on-camera thing together is kind of new. So, overall, I know I've not talked extensively about the film, but I would say that I enjoyed it. I mentioned a little bit about Rey in the beginning. You know, I have to preface my opinion here by saying that I think if I watched the original movies at my age now, and I didn't have the benefit of seeing them in the late 70s, early 80s, like when I was a kid, that I'd think totally differently seeing it the first time, like as an adult, than I would have as a kid. And you just have this kind of almost artificial, or I guess transitional way of looking at things throughout your life. And so I guess I could have been like a lot more critical of Luke Skywalker or other characters, you know, if I was watching them back then. But having said that, I find with the character Rey in particular that except for a couple of snapshots where she's hugging Finn, or like, you know, at just one moment where she's smiling and seems to be happy and content, I found that for the entire two movies, she's basically looks like aghast, you know, and in shock, you know, from one scene to the next. And because of that, I struggled a little bit with the depth of the character. It's just very lopsided. Now, you can make a lot of... I've said this to people, and people said, yeah, but you have to understand. I mean, like, look at what's happening to her throughout all of the movies. And it's, like, true, and it's never going to stop, because we're not going to make a movie about drinking coffee, you know, Star Wars characters having coffee, you know, but it's always going to be like that. But I found that the character just seems to be aghast and in shock and in sort of angst throughout everything. And it's just really difficult for me to see lots of dimensions to the character at this point. I'd almost have to say that that's my biggest criticism of all of it at this point. But overall, I liked it, and I see that my kids really like it, and I can kind of understand why, and I do have to give a pass on certain things. I mean, like, we do, to some degree, we want to explain realism within fantasy, and if you go down that road, then it's kind of a slippery slope. To have something be enjoyable and have it still remain fiction and fantasy, we want a certain amount of kind of being able to have it sit well with us. Like, is this a certain amount of realism within our fantasy world here? Is it believable? Do we buy it? You know, but at the same time, if you could take that too far, then it's going to be just a boring movie. It's not going to be an action adventure that's fiction. And so, overall, I'd have to say, because, you know, balancing it all out, that I did like it. Alright. I'm interested in what you guys have to say about it. Hopefully I don't offend anybody with my thoughts on it, because truly this is just my opinion, and I know that Star Wars is such a touchy subject for folks, and people, almost everybody that I talk to that has an opinion on it kind of has a different opinion on it. I mean, you know, like, you can either like it or hate it, or be a little ambivalent. But at the end of the day, if you like it or hate it, when you start talking about why, almost everybody that I've talked to has kind of like a different opinion. And so at the end of the day, it's really something easily to disagree on. So, but I am interested in your thoughts. I do know of a couple of people that watch the channel that are pretty diehard. And there I am going off camera again. So, watching the Star Wars and thinking about this, and then recently, you may have seen that little miniature I did that Lucid Eye made, the little sort of wizard sitting on the die. Those two things together made me think of another topic to discuss. I mentioned the six-sided die being yellow, and how that was the color die that I used as a kid with my first sort of D&D set. That's why I painted that. So the topic is game components, but I don't want to just talk about the importance of game components, so that might come up. I want to talk about sort of like your passion for games and how it relates to the game components and the actual production of the game. The Solo Wargaming Show talked about, in a recent video, replayability of a game as a characteristic of board games. And whenever I'm not a huge board game player, but whenever I look at like Board Game Geek, you know, there's these categories and how they look at board games, and one of them is components. Now, I think my original D&D dice, although they were yellow, I believe they were actually numbers, not dots. I think I said that it was like a yellow die with black dots, but when I thought back to it again, I realized that I believe it came with a crayon, and they were numbers, and you sort of colored in the die where the numbers were and kind of wiped it off, and that was how you got your identification marks on there. And so when I was thinking about the original red box and just how meaningful it is to me, like, even though I don't have my original red box still, when I think back to either the artwork for it or anything that kind of came with it, it's all almost like ceremonial to me. I was so infatuated with the original red box that came out, and they listed as coming out between 79 and 83. Like, there were different publishings of it. I must have got it between 80 and 83. My beginnings in D&D were in 4th grade, and the way I actually appreciated and played D&D in 4th grade was extremely different than the way I appreciated and played it in later, like 6th grade through 9th grade, and then even a little bit at certain points in high school. I really had a very visceral appreciation of Dungeons and Dragons when I was very young. The first time I saw the polyhedral dice, I didn't even know how to use them, but I kind of saw this as this sort of archaic thing that I didn't understand, but I was kind of infatuated by them. I was like, well, what can you do with those? I mean, look at all of those. They just looked in a 4th grader's mind that was yearning for this imagery and how to insert myself into this. They looked like mystical, and I just don't know how to explain it. But they're game components, right? And ultimately. And I was infatuated just with just the look of them, like the first time I saw them, and what they kind of represented to me as this, even after understanding a little more how they worked, it still held that sort of awe to me. I pulled up I can throw some pictures up if I can find them on the net. I'm sure I probably can, but I pulled up a PDF copy of the original basic set when thinking about this discussion for today and looking at it, and I hadn't seen it in a really long time. And they have this solo adventure, which is one of the things I wanted to get to, because I loved all the artwork in it. I poured over that at that age. I mean, the thing about how I appreciated D&D is that, like, I looked at that artwork and I just saw the possibilities in it, and it just was so defining to me about what those character classes were supposed to be, and the imagery was so crucial to some of my understanding of what the world was. We just, like, as an adult now, I oftentimes just see pictures in games for books, and I just view them as just an illustration. Like, I look to the rules, and I look to the content and the beef, and bulk within the game itself to try to really identify with it and see what it is. But back then, when I was in 4th grade, I looked at the pictures, and the pictures themselves imbued me with an opinion on what the content was within the book. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the way my mind worked at that age. And that's why those illustrations are so powerful to me to this day. There was one picture of just sort of a guy in a weapon sort of shop, like armory is what I should probably call it. And he was looking at a sword, and I wanted to know what kind of sword that was, and I wanted to know kind of who he was, and he was somebody that really showed up over and over again for this solo adventure. So he was sort of a fighter character, and kind of he had took on a whole new meaning just through the artwork as to who he was. And each one of those pictures just I would stare at for so long at that age. Now I know illustration and artwork isn't necessarily, I'm wondering whether I guess it's part of the game components, because it's not the rules. I mean, it is sort of the presentation. But I find that to be, I've got people running above me. Hopefully that's not too annoying. I apologize. But I find that those things were so important back then, and even that first solo adventure, I believe it was a solo adventure, and it had the rust monster, which I never forgot. I even today when I went to it, I was like, okay, I want to see the adventure with the rust monster. I remembered that all these years ago. We're talking 35 years ago that I actually looked at that, and I still remembered it to this day. And so what I'm kind of getting at here with this discussion, what I'm trying to at least, is that there was a feel to the game that I had at that age when I first encountered D&D that was kind of magical to me, and the game components were a big part of it. First seeing those colorful polyhedral dice, just all of the various shapes. I mean, they look like mystical objects. I mean, if you don't think of them as dice, because a lot of us, let's say you play Infinity, well, you use the 20-sided die, right? It's not a mystical object. I mean, you've probably seen it a million times, and it is what it is. It's a 20-sided die. But in the mind of a 4th grader, when I first saw it, when I first was approached with it, and I didn't even know what they did, they were you might as well have them in a little wooden box with symbols on the inside, because to me they represented that. I mean, they were this was deep stuff, to learn in this game and to insert myself into this world. And so between all of the imagery in it, I love the choice of the color cover, because that red dragon with the I always thought of the fighter on the front being Warduke, even though I don't believe he was, because Warduke was a character like in the cartoon later, and even action figures that came out for D&D. But he was different, but he kind of reminded me of Warduke a little bit later. But I just love that fighter on the front with the red dragon behind him, the awesome color cover, and then all those illustrations inside are just timeless. And so the red box had a lot to it that, in addition to the substance of the game that I eventually was really drawn into, that drew me in of itself and created a feeling and effect in the components. Well, I was trying to think of what today gives me the same kind of experience, or when was the last time I had that kind of experience with any game. Now, I've talked about Star Wars X-Wing on the channel, and it's funny that I bring up X-Wing before I bring up Armada for this discussion, because I probably, if I had to choose, and I think I've said this before, but if I had to choose one, I probably, between Armada and X-Wing, to play and to own as a game, if I was forced to choose, I would probably choose Armada. I do think overall the style of the game probably fits a niche for me that I would rather have if I had to choose the two. I do love both of them, and I don't want to get rid of either one. So I'm not saying that I don't like X-Wing or that it's bad. As a matter of fact, I just played it last week, had a fun game, and I'm looking forward to playing again this week. Because, we as longtime viewers of the channel know, they know I cycle through games, and ones that I like, we put down, we play it a few times, put down, and then we go back to it. So I haven't really had much ability to get much gaming time in recently just because I've been working a lot, but I've had one standard time slot, like on Thursdays, that I do play with one friend that I was still able to still do. And so we did choose the X-Wing for it. Now, when I was thinking about this topic, I ended up thinking of X-Wing as a really good example of a game where the game itself and its full package and its components gave me a feeling like that original D&D experience to some degree. I was a late entry into X-Wing, and I saw some of this stuff come out, and I was really impressed with the way the ships looked. They're pre-painted, but initially in particular, they were fairly simple kind of paint jobs, but they were very simple and effective. It was just dirty space that they were kind of trying to emulate at that time. It was just like your white ships, and they were washed black, and they had some components, but they were done in such a way that it really did give you a good feeling for the original film. And yeah, so like you were right off the bat, you were able to play with Star Wars ships in a game. The ship's size, maybe sort of identify it with it in a different way than the Armada. Like your TIE fighters and X-Wings are just so small in Armada that I don't really see them the same way. And they're almost like having little models. They're kind of nice little models unto themselves. And then they do come on a very sort of cool... it was the first game like this of its kind for Fantasy Flight that I'm aware of, and they had like this really nice base that they were on that was very functional, looked very cool with its colored arcs, and so it was very intriguing from that perspective. Then you have like... I know not everybody's... People are getting kind of tired with buying game-specific dice, and I understand that because it can be quite an expensive kind of venture in the long run if you play lots of different games. But they had some really cool individual dice for the game. And that can always be fun. I mean, that's can be fun in of itself. I mean, I love my Saga dice. I don't know that I'd want to play Saga without Saga dice, to be honest. They really do. The battle board and the dice do add an element of fun to the game. And in the same way, X-Wing also adds fun in its components. Now, I think I mentioned that in the past that I find the movement mechanic very elegant in X-Wing, and I love the templates, the movement templates, and the way that works. And so, as a kid that was very much into the action figures for Star Wars, I mean, Christmases in the early 80s wouldn't have been the same without them. Thinking back, this was just a really nostalgic, fun, cool thing, this X-Wing game, coming to play. And when I first pulled it out and played it, I thought, this is great. And it really gave me that feeling of when looking at a different ship and just being able to see the stuff. I mean, just kind of, it really made you identify with the background that you're dealing with for the game. And I got not the same exact feeling as the D&D, but it was the closest thing that I could really compare it to. And definitely, I don't have the vivid wonder and awe that I did as a fourth grader, you know, but it certainly still captured my imagination quite a bit, even as an adult. I had another topic when talking about X-Wing a while ago. I don't know if many of you remember, and it was talking about the mystery of a game and overplaying a game and stuff, and I don't want to actually digress back to that topic, but this is sort of, it relates to it a bit. I do think X-Wing, for me, if not overconsumed and not becoming too familiar with it and overconsuming it to the point of taking the mystery away, it can have that sort of fun feel that I'm describing. What do you guys think as far as game components and how important they are for your games? Do you have games that give you a similar feeling for the same reasons that I described within X-Wing or the original Dungeons and Dragons? Games today that you've encountered that make you really excited for those similar reasons. At the end of the day, and this is a wargaming channel with miniatures, and you know there are a lot of different types of games out there, and particularly some of the historical ones. Like you might have some really bare bones rule sets where they pretty much don't have any components. I mean, you're getting kind of a book that's black and white, and maybe it's been around for a while, and it has no actual components to the game. I mean, they expect you to use everything. Dice, miniatures, you know, everything is pretty much supplied by you, and there is some appeal to that in some ways. I mean, like I can engage in that experience as well, but I bring up that example like to ask you is that always just fine with you, or do you like buying games that actually have you know, like cool components that suck you into it and make you really enjoy the product? Add to the experience? Do they ever add to the experience of the game for you? It's funny because there's a little voice inside me that when I bring this subject up, I hear someone saying in the future as I present this video, well, that shouldn't add anything to the game because it has nothing to do with the game. It's just purely the visible trappings of it, you know, or you know, and I'm just waiting for that because I could see how some people could feel that way. I mean, and it feels very shallow and materialistic at times to openly admit that I like game components, you know, to be of a good quality and that as part of the gaming experience. But then at the same time, the little voice tells me, yeah, but like many people do, and that's why they're actually part of these ranking systems for games as well, because people do like to buy a quality product despite what some people might say. Everybody's different. And in that way, you can make the argument as to whether models are important at all. Like, the quality of models you could really extend that aspect of the discussion of game components and how they look and how they add to a feel of a game and liking a game. You could add just this idea that if models are important, miniatures and the way they look, then you're kind of already sort of giving credence to the importance of the visual to your experience. That's not meant to be a cop-out. That divergence is just another way of looking at it. Well, I think I'm basically done with the discussion for today. I only have 2 main topics today. I hope I didn't rant too far. I'm very interested in what you guys think about the recent Star Wars movies in general. I expect answers across the board, to be honest. I expect lots of people to disagree with me on that. And I also am interested in your thoughts on the game components and how important it is. How does it add to the feel of the game for you? Have you had similar experiences to those that I've described? So, that is the Heresy Hump Day this week. I hope you guys are having a good one, and talk to you later.